Welcome to Authentically Debz, my podcast. A Southern girl looks at 70. Before I finish with my life to this point, there's a couple of things that I want to mention. I haven't spent a lot of time talking about my family, probably not enough talking about my two dear daughters, and I mean that sincerely. But at this time I want to talk about my three grandchildren who are truly the lights of my life. My eldest grandchild is the granddaughter that I raised until she was 15. I love her like a daughter. I love her unconditionally. I suppose I love all of my children unconditionally, including the ones that I teach. I think I need to love everyone unconditionally. And that includes Donald Trump. But that remains a challenge. Mariah, my oldest, was and is the most beautiful little girl, baby. She was the perfect child. I was the teacher. She was my grandchild. We lived together. Were in the same school or thereabouts for a while. She made almost straight A's. Maybe she did make straight A's. She was a hell of an athlete. You can't live someone's life for them. But boy, could she have done something with her athletic ability. And of course, I wanted it to be golf because she was good in everything she tried. And my big deal was getting her a college scholarship. I suppose I should have cared more that she cared more about golf. She liked it, she tolerated it, she even took it in high school. She had pros that wanted to work with her for free because she was maybe not that good yet, but had that much potential. And more golf scholarships go unclaimed, especially for women, than any other sports scholarship. Hear ye, hear ye. Mariah went back to live with her mother when she was 15. I made a huge mistake that I've mentioned that was at least partially responsible for that. At least her mother, my oldest daughter, was not well, is not well now, but seems to be better when Mariah went back to live with her. Bottom line, Mariah succumbed to her predilection for addiction, which she really got from all sides, mother, father, grandfather, grandmother. She started out with alcohol, but graduated to meth, and that took her away from herself and us meaning me, I guess, and the rest of the family, for a number of years. I always knew she would return. I prayed a lot, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm recovering, and it is still one day at a time for all of us alcoholics and addicts that are recovering. Mariah is a tremendous person. She's also beautiful, outside and deeply inside. She's quite headstrong, but I think she's willing to be open-minded and listen. She's very eclectic about almost everything. I'm glad in this incarnation I got to spend so much time with her, and I hope to spend more time with her. I could go on and on about Mariah. Suffice to say, she's my girl. Isaiah, my second oldest grandchild, 4 years younger than Mariah, was born to my oldest daughter by a different father, whom Heather was actually married to. Mariah was born in San Francisco. Isaiah was born in Torrance. Both Cali babies. I cannot say I was excited when I found out Heather was pregnant, really, with either one of these children, because Heather was not well. She had no way at that time or those times to support these children. And although I raised Mariah, I was not going to raise Isaiah. I couldn't. I just couldn't do it again. But I have told Isaiah many times that had things been reversed and he had been born first, then I would have raised him and not Mariah. I know that he saw my raising Mariah, and he was living with his mother and his father, and I know that they fought a great deal, verbally mostly, and I know that Isaiah grew up with them and then with my daughter alone, and my oldest daughter could be my best friend. She is certainly capable of it. She's just had a very troubled life, but she is a precious, charming young woman. And she'll be 50 next month. And she looks like she's about 35. And the girl has been through hell and back. So she's strong as shit. That was not a very good analogy. But bottom line, she's strong. Getting back to Isaiah, I'm sure he felt envious of his sister sometimes because she was certainly, as he could see, having a better time of it as a child than he was. Poor babe, he was very accident prone, and I shouldn't be laughing about this. He broke his femur when he was about, I think, 6. He had a babysitter over, and he was jumping around on the sofa, and the babysitter was about 12. She was a big girl, and as he was jumping high in the air, she stood up from the floor and crashed into his leg. Femur's the largest bone in the body. It's hard to break, probably even for a kid, but he broke his. So he was in not a complete body cast, but from the waist down for a while. Had, pins in his leg. Just a horrible thing for a kid. He's also as strong as they come. I'm quite sure all 3 of my grandchildren are terribly resilient. And I hope they got some of that from me. Isaiah always suffered also from asthma. His father had asthma, and Isaiah has not really quite outgrown it because my daughter didn't have the kind of insurance that she should have had. Isaiah always had to go to the emergency room. He spent many days in the emergency room with his asthma. And if he got bronchitis, it was a major deal. He still has to get asthma treatments. I try to help him with his medication as far as his inhalers. Isaiah is, I believe he will be 24 in December, and he is an incredible writer, rapper. He's a lyricist. Like me, when I was singing, he's a lyricist. He doesn't usually do the beats, but he has someone that does. Isaiah could be, what do you call this, a working rapper. He could be making a living at it. But he has a few problems. He is, I think, a depressive. He has anger issues. He's gorgeous. I told both he and his girlfriend of many, many, many years, since they are both drop-dead gorgeous, that they could be getting modeling jobs. They live in Los Angeles. They don't seem to want to do it. They don't seem to have the confidence to do it. I'm just trying to find a way that they can have some kind of income so that they can do what they really want. I know Isaiah wants to do the music. I'm not sure what Jessica wants. She's also had a very troubled life. Isaiah's live-in girlfriend for some time now. Actually, she's been in love with him since she was 10. And interestingly, Mariah dated her older brother, Nelson, and that's how young Jessica met Isaiah. Isaiah's about, I'd say 4, maybe 5 years older than Jessica. She's a darling girl. He's a darling boy. I think my whole family is pretty darling, and I'm not just saying that out of prejudice. They're very charming people. So Isaiah and Jessica recently found Nelson, Mariah's former boyfriend, dead. Without going into a lot of detail, Jessica's life has been anything but easy. At one time, her whole family lived on the street. Since then, her father has, straightened up, recovering meth addict, works in construction now, had 5 kids. Now he has 5 more kids by another wife. But Nelson was his only boy at that time. And Nelson's mother still lives on the street and is still a meth addict. When Nelson and Mariah broke up, I don't know that was the reason. Nelson took a really, really wrong turn. But he began to live on the street with his mother. And he became schizophrenic, and I can't validate this, but supposedly it was drug-induced schizophrenia. Mariah moved on, got better, but Nelson just was a lost puppy. And if you had met Nelson before he or Mariah really started using, he was always a kind soul. And the fact that my grandson and Nelson's sister found Nelson's body near a railroad track after the police had just discovered it was very, very traumatic for them, I'm sure. And it's truly sad to me because Nelson was such a good soul. Again, addiction is familial. It goes from generation to generation. This is a young man that should be here today and should have gotten more help and support. I really look to his father for that because mother's still addicted. I just know we're not helping people the way we should. So I wish my grandson all the luck in the world, and as I do better, I'm going to help him do better. And he's doing it his own way. My ex-husband, who is a multimillionaire, in my opinion, should be helping Isaiah at least to the point of helping him get started in something, whether it's welding, something, so that he can have a good living and can have some time to pursue his dream of music. And God willing, he will do that one day because he is ultra talented. Okay, moving on to my 3rd grandchild and my last grandchild this incarnation, Stella. Stella for Star, I call her. From Streetcar? She's nothing like the character on Streetcar, but she is a star. She's 9 years old now. She was born to my second, and I only have 2 children, my second child, a daughter, a wonderful daughter who has seemingly done everything right, who wanted to stay in Arkansas. I think she almost came out here at one point, so I hear. But then she met her husband now, who is her second husband, but she's been married to him for, 10 years? He's a wonderful man. He had 5 children, so this was kind of a big thing for Priscilla, who college grad, marketing specialist, married her college sweetheart. That didn't last. No children, thank God. And so when she married Kobe, her second husband, she wanted a child. Well, he already had 5. At that time, 2 were grown and 3 were living with his ex-wife. But Priscilla wanted a child, and they went through in vitro, and really it took almost the first time. And that's a very expensive procedure. So they had this little girl, Stella. My daughter had a tough pregnancy. She really, really wanted this child. And, it just kind of reminded me of, you're not going to believe I'm going to say this, of Kim Kardashian's first pregnancy. It was really hard. from what I saw on TV. And Priscilla's was really hard too. But Stella arrived. She was a beautiful child. Since Priscilla is in Arkansas, I didn't get to spend that much time with her. I did go down when Stella was about 3 months old and got to spend some time with her then. And she was always such a good baby, and they always had her trained so well. My daughter tried, but I don't think she ended up breastfeeding. So this baby was never one of those babies that goes down with a bottle or that you have to put to sleep with a bottle. When she was really young, she took a bottle and then she would play a little bit. And then I remember my daughter would put her in the crib and basically say goodnight to her, and the babe would just go to sleep. She was a great kid, and I know that they were both, I think especially my daughter, trying not to spoil her. But when my daughter told her husband that she wanted another child, because although she adored Stella, we all do, she also wanted a son. He said, "Oh, no way. I already have 4 boys and 1 girl. Well, now I have Stella too, so that's 2 girls. And no." And so Priscilla's answer to that was, "Okay, I'm going to spoil her." Stella turns 9. She's very precocious, much like her mother. I used to literally love being around my second child, Priscilla, because she was smarter than me. She was challenging to be around. She was so precocious. And Stella has that to a degree too. Her mother, Priscilla, was a competitive dancer. She was also in beauty pageants, which, thank God, we have skipped for Stella. She was an extraordinary tap dancer, and Stella hasn't really had much of that. But Stella is a championship competitive dancer, and she's 9 years old. She wants to be a Broadway star. She's been watching the Tonys since she was 4 years old. She's taking voice lessons now, and since I'm in California, I've been able to give her at least a Zoom acting class. And she's also had a summer experience with the Arkansas Repertory Theater, in which she was definitely one of the leaders in that program. So anyway, my granddaughter is just extraordinary. She's talented. She wants to be in show business, and there's a little push and pull between my daughter and me, and it's probably a good thing that my daughter is not as gung-ho about it as I am. And I also know of all the horror stories of child actors, but I also know that this child actor wants it. It's not being pushed on her at all. Me, I'm her grandmother. I'm an actor. I see how talented she is. And I mean, she's my grandchild, so there must be a little prejudice in there, but the kid is talented. The camera loves her, both still and moving. And if she were in Los Angeles right now, she would have work. But the way it is now, which is what I'm going to talk about next, or soon, very soon, with the pandemic we're having, COVID-19, everything is Zoom, everything is self-tape. So really, you can live anywhere in the world and get acting work. So I'm going to close on my 3 grandchildren for now. Just didn't want them to be neglected in this memoir of mine, Authentically, Debz. Now I'm going to talk just a little more about my teaching incarcerated youth, which I've been doing since 2006 and have been teaching youth at risk since the beginning of the millennium, 2000. Really wasn't going to, at least I didn't plan to mention this again in the actual, what I'm calling the narrative, in the telling of my life. But something happened after I had already recorded that part of my life, and I am still teaching them. Although because of the pandemic that I'm going to talk about lastly, we are all teaching remotely from home. On February 21st of this year, 2020, I was assaulted by one of my students. one of my incarcerated students. This is the second time something like this has happened to me. The first time was about 6 years ago when I was working at my home juvenile hall, Los Padrinos, which has since closed. I'm not sure why it closed. It was the best of the 3 juvenile halls in the county, definitely closer to my home. It was perfect. And I didn't have a classroom there. I am still and was then a special educator, but my job position, which I loved, was to write the legal documents. Every special education student has an IEP, which is an independent education plan, and they have to have one of these documents when they come in, and then they have to have one annually, and then they have to have one every 3 years in which they are formally assessed. And I did all of that for all of the special education students at Los Padrinos. So although I had interplay with my students every day, it was always one-on-one. And my position was to write their documents. And I absolutely loved this position, having been in the classroom for years prior to that. One day my principal asked me, because he was desperate, he had no subs, if I would cover a classroom for him. This particular classroom, as it turns out, was an illegal kind of situation because they had grouped special ed students that would normally have been all day in a special day class, with general ed students, and these were all girls. And when I got to the class, and every special ed class, I think I've mentioned this, always has a paraeducator or an assistant. I was not told that this one student, actually the only student in the class that I knew that I had taught, was having a really bad day that day. She probably shouldn't have even been in the classroom. She had already broken a window in the living unit, and the classroom was actually in that building. She was also in a group of older girls, and she was very challenging behaviorally, although I'd never really had a problem with her before when I had taught her, when she was actually in my classroom, my real classroom. But this day, she was doing everything she could to get the attention of the older girls. She was also gay, and she was, she was kind of out of control that day. She was just trying to impress the older girls. And she was doing everything she did, let's say, was disrupting the lesson. And I finally asked the probation officer, who's the law enforcement, the guard there, a female guard, if she would take her out of the classroom and talk to her, because she needed to calm down somewhat. And like many other students, at least that day, she had ADHD. When I told the probation officer to take her out and talk to her, she came directly to me. I think I had embarrassed her. And the probation officer was right behind her, attempting to grab her arms, but missed her, I guess, her left arm that she had a pencil in, and she ended up stabbing me in the left temple, my head. Drew blood. But I remember I went to Kaiser Hospital. They checked me out, and I remember I came back to school the next day. No one could believe it. I did file charges on the young lady, and she did get an additional juvenile felony, and they removed her pretty swiftly from the facility, which was the thing to do. When you've assaulted a teacher, you definitely shouldn't be around that teacher anymore. And frankly, I think they did the right thing. Now, 6 years later, back in February of this year, I'm teaching, and since Los Padrinos has closed, I'm now back in the classroom, and I chose to move to Central Juvenile Hall. It was either that, which was far from my home, but wasn't as far as the second juvenile facility, which was in Sylmar. Wasn't as far a drive. So I went there, and I did have a special day class. It was boys, and I did have the developmentally disabled. I think I've mentioned this before, but our kids were not intellectually challenged. They were emotionally disturbed, all PTSD. Many had anger issues, and almost all were attention deficit hyperactivity. Some were bipolar, some were schizophrenic. Some should not have even been there, but I guess California has nothing else, no place else to put them at this time. This particular student who assaulted me was a burly 17-year-old. He always gave me a bear hug as I walked into his building, which was his living quarters, where he had his cell or his room, and also had the classroom where I taught my special ed students. That morning, I didn't see him when I walked in, and we always had a probation person, the guard, at the door. This was one of those perfect storm days. We had the worst probation person, and that's really all I'm going to go into at this point. But she was not helpful at all. In fact, it was her call as to whether he came into school. He was not ready for school. When he came in, he truly had fire in his eyes. He was upset about a previous environment. I don't know what happened with him. I do know that this was a kid that probably when he was not incarcerated, he didn't go to school at all because he was definitely in a gang. I don't know whether he lived with his mom or both parents or what. I do know that he had a mom and she had educational rights, but he was very low academically. And I don't know, he was primarily emotionally disturbed, possibly had a learning disability too. I don't know exactly why he was as low as he was, pretty much across the board academically. But he was, and he very much wanted a one-on-one. Because if I could have spent all my time with him, working with him, then he would have had an easier time of it. And if my assistant could have spent all of her time working with him, he would have had an easier time of it. And although we had usually less than 10 students, which is less than the general ed classes have in this incarcerated situation, we couldn't spend all our time with him, and he very much wanted a one-on-one who could. I knew from experience that the way he could get a one-on-one was to have his mother call and demand an IEP, a meeting, and request one. I said that to him. I guess you could say it was in confidence, but I said his mother needed to call our school. I gave him the number, but apparently it never happened. Don't even know whether he was in touch very much with his mother. But truly part of his problem was that he was so frustrated because he was so low academically, and unless he had one-on-one help, his days in school were difficult, unless he copied off of others, which he would do unless you stopped him. That day, and any time this student had ever been inappropriate verbally with me or had done something wrong, he would, I think one time he took my phone, but I ended up getting it back and he ended up apologizing. He always apologized, but this day was different. The kid eventually, even after talking to the probation officer who I thought would de-escalate him, didn't, but he ended up grabbing my laptop computer, breaking it in two, and then throwing the heavier hard drive part of it at my right cheek. This was not expected. The reason I was turned to the right was because I was looking at the door to see, after he broke the computer, if anyone was going to come back up the probation woman that we had at the door. No one was, and then I was struck by him, not more than probably 2 feet apart, he and I. And I went down. I did not lose consciousness. It did not break my jaw. I was concussed. The ambulance came. I went to USC Med. I went to their emergency room, all sorts of x-rays. I went home, and I did not go back to work because I looked like I had a baseball in my right jaw area for about a month. And that was definitely a traumatic thing. Okay, so I'm home for a month, And believe me, no one expected me to come back within a month. And I might also add that I was the, I think, 7th teacher that had been assaulted in the last 3 months. The inmates were truly running the asylum at the juvenile court schools. And it's because, well, I'm going to say what I think. I don't have any real proof. And I do like our governor. One thing he wants to do is to make the juvenile justice system more therapeutic and less punitive. I know that when I started teaching the incarcerated youth in 2006, I wouldn't say it was punitive, but it was very strict. When these students moved around the facility, they had their hands behind their back. There was no talking. Movement was serious. And the reason it needed to be serious was because we had so many gang members that a riot could have broken out at any time. And yes, probation did have to restrain some students, had to use pepper spray on occasion. The students would frequently get into fights with each other, more often than not gang-related, but they would not ever hit a teacher, and very rarely would they in any way assault a probation officer who was their law enforcement there, who were their guards. That has completely changed now. Probation can no longer use pepper spray. There are real restrictions on whether they can restrain a student when necessary. The students know this, they've picked up on it, and that's why they feel free to do pretty much what they want. And I will say that the student who assaulted me, although I did file a felony charge against him, and he did get an additional juvenile felony, and he was also fighting armed robbery. That's why he was there to begin with. In the juvenile hall system, let me just mention that these students they've been accused of something, but they've not been found guilty or innocent. Their cases are being adjudicated, and that's why they come and go so frequently. We do have a lot of recidivism. But this student actually went home while I was recuperating, which was very strange to me, except while I was recuperating, toward the end of my recuperation, the COVID-19 pandemic hit full force in the United States. So a lot of students were going home. A lot of advocates of the students, professional advocates, attorneys, which probably they didn't have much work otherwise, they were coming out of the woodwork, often demanding that these incarcerated youth be sent home or that they were no longer incarcerated. And some of them were sent home. And it remains a question whether they will be all sent home. Some of them are in there for murder charges. Many are in there for stealing a cell phone or for some kind of assault and battery. But it was very strange that this student went home. When I came back, I was offered a position at a different site, which there's 2 juvenile halls, but this was what we call a camp. It was a locked placement, and it was also closer to my home in Redondo Beach. So, I said, I'll take that. But when I came back, everything was remote teaching. We had to do a lot of technology, more so than I've ever had to do before in the classroom. We had to upload all of their assignments. The placement where I was now, they had little cottages, although they were incarcerated, or at least it was locked down. Then the principal had to distribute to probation their guards, their assignments. At that point, we had no way of teaching them, so we were supposed to call the units, but probation didn't ever want to let us speak to them. So then we were getting major pressure, or I should say our management with Los Angeles County Office of Education was getting major pressure from the advocates and the attorneys to provide virtual instruction to these students. So in addition to having to find their curriculum online, everything is online now. There are no more textbooks. All of the textbooks, everything is online. In order to teach them, we had to upload all of this curriculum, get it to them, and now we had to teach them virtually, like in a Zoom class, except LACO, Los Angeles County Office of Education, used what is called Microsoft Teams, which is a competitor now with Zoom. And I don't know whatever happened to Skype, by the way. Maybe somebody bought it, but Skype was before Zoom, and now Skype is nowhere that I know of. At any rate, since my position prior to my 5 months at Central, after Los Padrinos closed, since my position at Los Padrinos was not in the classroom, I didn't receive any of the technical training that the rest of the teachers did. When I went back and had to teach remotely, it was quite a steep learning curve for me. I had done PowerPoints in my classroom. I had done technology in my classroom. But I do know how to delegate. And although I was responsible for all of the content and the curriculum, my students always did the PowerPoints. They did a lot of the technology for me. But now I had to do everything. So in my opinion, I am now working harder as a teacher at what I consider a day job than I have ever worked before. And since it is near the end of my career, this does not please me. And I cannot see my students. They can see me for about 5 minutes, and then I go away, and then it's like a Zoom class without being able to see them. I try to teach them, and it's just very strange. Also, it occurs to me that since probation is supposed to be their parents while they are there, probation is bringing them to their classrooms, but the teachers aren't there. We're at home. We're teaching from home, like the other school districts are doing. But these students are not at home. They are in the classroom. And I'm not even sure that's legal because none of the other students are in the classroom. And they've also made our poor, not in the sense that they don't have any money, but I don't think it's fair kind of poor. Paraeducators, assistants go in and set up the computers and be with the students with masks. At least the paraeducators have on masks. The teachers don't have to go in, but it's not a good situation. And the students are not learning as much because as they do in the classroom, except you can see them when you're in the classroom with them, they are misusing the chat room with a lot of gang activity. They're often leaving the classroom, and they're not getting as good an education as they were getting in the classroom, although the special education students that we have are so behavioral that just getting them to remain seated during instruction is considered a success. Some of these kids are very, very smart academically, but the problems they come in with behaviorally challenge them greatly. So I wanted to mention that. So that's where I am with it. I have decided now that also that since I'm at this different site now, I'm teaching, when I had my own classroom, I was teaching all of the academic subjects. My favorite, of course, being English language arts and history or social studies. Now I'm teaching only science and math. My least favorite subjects, particularly math. I really, and I have worked at this particular place, Dorothy Kirby School before. Years ago, I worked there for 2 years teaching math and science, and I've had enough of teaching just math and science. Let me mention something else about Dorothy Kirby. It's probably the oldest facility for holding incarcerated youth in California. For those of you who remember even, or for those of you who don't, if you care to, you can Google it, who Lana Turner is. Her daughter was, I believe, convicted of stabbing to death her mother's boyfriend when he was attacking her mother, and this daughter was at Dorothy Kirby years and years and years ago. That's how old Dorothy Kirby is. But I have decided that, well, number one, I am now taking a temporary disability until the end of the school year, which is June 30th, 2020. And I think when I when I got this injury, I returned as soon as I possibly could physically. But I don't think I had ever dealt with either the first assault 6 years ago or certainly this last one emotionally or mentally. Because I noticed that when I returned and we were teaching remotely, I was always anxious and depressed. I didn't even want to get up in the mornings. Frankly, I'm better, but I still don't want to get up in the mornings. Heck, a lot of people don't want to get up in the mornings. But this is unlike me, okay? So I'm taking a break. And I've decided that I'm going to tell them, and I'm 70 now. They probably don't care whether I come or go. But I'm going to retire unless they let me teach English language arts and or history. And I will even keep science at Dorothy Kirby. What I really want is the position that I had at Los Padrinos of writing the legal documents. And if that person retires at Central, I want her position. And let me just really quickly tell you that Central and Dorothy Kirby, where I am, are connected. They're part of the same, what we call PAU or Principal Administrative Unit. But instead of going to the principal or the assistant principal, I'm going to go to management. I know a couple of people in management who like me and know that I am a good teacher and very competent at what I do, and I'm going to ask them for what I want. And if I don't get it, I'm going to retire. And guess what? And this is just a day job to me, but it's an important day job because I really shouldn't retire now. I won't have the income that I need, which is why I want this podcast to work. And I want to get more work as an actor, et cetera, and we're going to talk about all of that. But I did want to mention this pandemic and what I'm doing during the pandemic. I'll just close by saying, in addition to continuing to work as an actor, I'm going to become a script reader and an audiobook narrator. That's the only kind of work I'm willing to do because it's in the arts, in addition to just strictly acting. I'd love to produce, just like I'm producing this. And I guess we've come to the end of this, folks, or at least the end of this part of it. And now I'd like to talk to just a bunch of people, actors, anyone. I am eternally curious and care about people. And I love, love, love animals. And that includes people. Okay, stay tuned. Still swear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So have a good one, and we'll talk soon. And thank you for staying along for the ride. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to Authentically Debz. And if you like my show, please subscribe, leave a review, and definitely tell a friend. Oh, and make sure to visit my website where you can keep up with my current projects, learn a little more about me, and follow my latest news. And that website is www.deborahjangray.com. The spelling is Debora, no H, Jangray. And most importantly, blessings to everyone.